Most of us have at least one memory connected to an old cedar chest like this, or maybe even one of these miniatures. If you close your eyes for a moment, you might still see it, resting at the foot of your mother's bed, or sitting quietly in the hallway of your grandmother's home. For me, it was even the unforgettable memory of standing in the very place where these chests were made. Through this restoration story, my hope is that you'll take a few moments to reflect on your own story of hope, no matter where you are in life, because these simple pieces carry with them the weight of generations, and they have a way of touching our hearts forever, and hold stories we carry through life, reminding us of the quiet moments that shaped us and the people we love. This chest sitting in my workshop now isn't just any hope chest. By my own standards, it's one of the rarest and most sought-after models ever made, and what I found inside changed everything. My name is Barry, and it's good to be with you again. This was no accident. I chose this project to tell a story, a chapter of life that has already been written. This is the story of the Hope Chest, and more specifically, the Sweetheart Chest, broken and forgotten, but ready for a second chance. I recently found this old chest on Marketplace, listed for 2 weeks. My $200 offer was accepted, so I drove 2.5 hours south of Dubuque, Iowa to pick it up. I thought I'd bring it home, restore it, and maybe resell it, but that's not what happened once I discovered what was inside. Many of you probably recognize this as part of the Lane Acclaim line from the 1960s, thanks mostly in part to the ash or fruitwood dovetail-shaped veneer paired with the gorgeous book-matched walnut veneer inlay. The Acclaim line is still arguably the most sought-after of all the Lane furniture pieces. I've owned 40 or 50 of these Acclaim pieces, but never the cedar chest, until now. Technically, this is a cedar-lined storage chest designed to protect whatever was placed inside, but to generations before us, it was known by a much more meaningful name, the Hope Chest. By the 1920s, Lane began leaning into the romantic symbolism surrounding these chests. Instead of simply selling storage furniture, they sold an ideal, the idea that a young woman would prepare for her future marriage by filling a chest with cherished household items, linens, and keepsakes. But the story doesn't end there. I've restored and refinished many cedar chests in the past, but for reasons I have yet to discuss, this one I'm currently working on is going to be a forever piece for me. So although there is minimal damage to this chest, the finish is still dull and failing. There's also a missing trim piece that needs to be made. I'll begin by stripping the old lacquer and attempt to refinish this in a way that it will last another 60 years. As I remove the old finishes, there are a few things I need to be aware of. The top of this chest was made the same way as this coffee table I worked on several years ago. These dovetail inlays are simply a thin layer of ash or fruitwood veneer, and the border pieces were made from solid ash or fruitwood. The inner core, or substrate, is engineered pressed particle board. This was less likely to warp, as wood often does. Here's a better look at the solid border compared to the thin veneer inlay pressed over the particle board. Now I know where to be especially careful when scraping and sanding. To better understand the history of these old chests, a few years ago, I left Wisconsin and headed to Virginia to see where all the Lane furniture pieces were once made. Variations of cedar chests have been around a long time, but in 1912, the story of the Lane Hope Chest began. John and Ed Lane converted an abandoned tobacco warehouse into a small furniture factory in the small town of Alta Vista, Virginia. Their first and most successful product was the cedar chest. Over the years, I imagined the employees punching a time clock just before entering the original red brick factory. There are still some abandoned buildings on the property, but not much remains from the original factory. I did, however, discover something in another building on that day that I'll share with you in a moment. As I scrub off the rest of the original tinted lacquer with number 2 steel wool, I now see the stark contrast between the dark walnut veneer inlay and the fruitwood border. Fruitwood was a trade term used by manufacturers to describe light to medium brown hardwoods with fine, tight, uniform grain. It was also easy to machine and veneer. Many companies like Lane use fruitwood to describe secondary or accent veneers that contrast nicely with walnut, like the light ash seen here. At this point, I had to stop for a little cleanup. You'd think it was this guy who knocked this plant over, but this photo tells the real story. These cedar chests were marketed as a practical, protective storage box lined with red cedar. The natural oils from the cedar repelled moths and preserved fabrics, and what makes that possible is an airtight seal. However, many of you know there was a recall for many of these old locks. Unfortunately, children would climb inside and get trapped. Up until just a few years ago, you could provide the chest serial number and request a free lock replacement. Back then, a chest was made with solid 3/4 inch red cedar, with a stamp indicating the airtight seal had been tested. Now I do know the exact day, month, and year this chest was made, and I'll share that soon. But if you enjoy playing the guessing game, guess what day, month, and year. And here's one hint: sometime between 1960 and 1964. The Lane Hope Chest story continued in the 1940s, when World War II changed everything. Lane had already launched the now famous Sweetheart Chest campaign, or the Girl Graduate program, in the 1930s. But this is when things really took off, when soldiers began returning home from war with plans to marry. In 2025, Google said I could find one of these campaign ads in the March 23, 1942 edition of Life magazine, which saved me hours of searching. And here it is. It looks like a few waterfall-style cedar chests. What looks to be a more basic version for $29.75, or the Hope chest for $39.50. My grandmother still tells the story of her sweetheart chest that sits in the hallway of her home, and it was from the late 1940s. As excited as I was to find this old ad, that's not even the best part of this story, at least in my opinion. I'm comfortable leaving tiny scratches behind from this metal scraper, but would suggest a plastic scraper if it's your first time. Scraping the front face of this chest was still a little tricky. Not only did I need to be careful not to catch the dovetail inlays with the scraper, but I also had to scrape the rough edges where the trim was glued on. These black caps were another bold design choice, but were just painted on, and they're actually just a continuation of the tapered leg. So the story continues with these miniature cedar boxes that many of you are so familiar with. Lane distributed free miniature cedar boxes to millions of young women graduating high school, all the way through the 1990s actually. Each tiny box came with a coupon toward a full-size Lane chest once the soldiers came home. These sweetheart boxes became a cultural phenomenon. Millions still survive today. Maybe you still have your own, and if not, it's always fun to search for them in thrift stores and antique shops, because most of them have the name and location of the local furniture store, and I'll continue to share some of these throughout this video. Lane was already making a name in the furniture world, but that's how Lane became synonymous with the Hope chest tradition. As taste changed after the war, Lane adapted its cedar chest to match America's new mid-century modern interiors, and that's where the story of this chest begins. Refinishing furniture for the first time can be intimidating, and mistakes will be made, but success has a lot to do with having the patience for the prep work. I'm sanding every part of this cedar chest with 150 and 180 grit sandpaper, except for the red cedar on the inside, of course. I don't want to eliminate the satisfying natural aroma of the cedar by closing down the pores in the wood fibers. So have you guessed the day, month, and year this piece was manufactured? Because as I continue sanding, it will be revealed. In the 1960s, as Lane adapted to America's mid-century modern interiors, design choices included cleaner lines, walnut veneer accents, modern legs, and eventually design integrations with major furniture lines, including the cedar chest made to complement the Lane Acclaim series in the early 1960s. By reading the serial number backwards, we know this piece was manufactured August 25th of 1964, the same year the World's Fair was held in New York City. I was unable to find any evidence of an official Lane exhibit, but apparently Lane furniture did appear in staged home interiors inside the Better Living Center and American Home Pavilion. So who knows, maybe an Acclaim Hope chest like this could have been seen at the 1964 World's Fair. I don't know if you were close with your guess, but now guess the original cost of this Acclaim Cedar chest in 1964. Sadly, the next chapter in the story includes difficult times, but thankfully doesn't end there. I only found 3 small spots where the veneer was damaged, so I'll mix a 2-part epoxy filler and spread it over the void with a palette knife. I know there's a lot of information in this video and not much discussion related to the restoration itself, but I have over 100 restoration videos on my channel where I discuss all these restoration steps in detail. Today is about documenting my own journey with a piece of furniture, while at the same time sharing the story of the Hope Chest, one that has in one way or another impacted millions of lives. And I made up my mind I was going to share this story no matter how long it took. Remember at the beginning I said I found something in one of those buildings? Well, I'll share that in a moment. You may have noticed this adjustable desk or workbench I've been using in this video. Well, I'm pleased to be partnering with FlexiSpot for the 4th year in a row, and they made this restoration video possible. I spend countless hours every week working in this workshop, piecing together stories, restoring old furniture, and designing hardware on the CNC. Through all of that, one thing has made a bigger difference than I expected, and that's my FlexiSpot E7 Plus lift stand desk. Right out of the box, it took me about an hour to assemble, and the step-by-step instructions were easy to follow. This desk is solid, thoughtful, and engineered to last, and with its upgraded dual motor system and an incredibly stable leg design, this thing doesn't wobble, and it's made to handle up to 540 pounds. The part that I appreciate the most is that it moves with me, and I can raise it up to the perfect height while working. Those transitions, smooth, quiet, and effortless, help keep my back and neck from feeling like I just hauled another heavy dresser up a flight of stairs. I've used this desk for months now, and it's become one of my most reliable tools in the workshop. So if you're looking to upgrade your workspace, whether that's a home office, a creative studio, or your own workshop, check out the FlexiSpot E7 Plus lift stand desk. I'll place a link in the video description, and don't miss their Black Friday sales with up to 80% off. If you have a limited budget, you can choose their E7 Premium desk and use my code below for an extra $50 off. It's made a real difference for me, and I think you'll feel the same. So thank you FlexiSpot for making this video possible. Well, this is actually the first moment I brought this cedar chest into my workshop. When I opened it, I realized it still had all the original tags stapled from the inside. But that's not all. It also had the original envelope with some coupons for buying Reed & Barton silverware and fine china. And I'm convinced this is the original price tag, $89, based on everything else being so well preserved. but I'd love to know your thoughts. At first, I wasn't sure what these dark spots were on the surface of the walnut veneer, but when I sanded them back and they reappeared, my best guess now is that these are tannins bleeding through. In other words, natural oils in the wood fibers that have been trapped for all these years. What I discovered inside the abandoned factory years ago represents the next chapter in this story. From the 1970s through the 1990s, the Hope Chest tradition slowly faded. As cultural expectations around marriage changed, the classic Hope Chest tradition lost momentum. While Lane continued making cedar chests, their symbolic role was no longer the same. By the late 1990s, Hope Chest sales had declined sharply, and sadly today, old forgotten Hope chests can be found in many thrift stores across the country. But that's not to say many of you don't still have one of these tucked away somewhere in your home, passed down from a parent or grandparent. Or maybe you just rescued one secondhand, and in your own way continued the story it started generations ago. And that's where the final chapter will lead us in a moment. There's this gouge on the top of the cedar chest, and I'll do my best to raise the grain with a damp cloth and a hot iron. I'll pass the iron over the damp cloth for no more than 5 to 10 seconds at a time. This method yielded significant improvement, but this damage is still noticeable, and that's okay with me. For the final sanding, I'll use 180 grit sandpaper over the entire piece. This should help keep the wood fibers open, allowing the stain to absorb deep into the grain, hopefully giving this piece a nice rich color. I've refinished many Acclaim pieces. Sometimes I stained, and sometimes I just applied a clear coat. The finish choices will just depend on your own preferences. I like the stark contrast between the wood species, but will attempt to tone it down a little by applying a light walnut colored oil-based stain. I began staining to give this adequate time to dry, but I still need to sand the front drawer and make a missing trim piece. I think $200 for this old cedar chest was a great deal, but I didn't realize until I picked it up that the long trim piece for the bottom section was missing. I do have some light-colored ash in the shop, but with limited woodworking tools and the router table tucked away for the winter months, I decided the best plan was just to try and shape this new trim piece mostly by hand. Once refinished, I think the local resale of this cedar chest will be between $800 to $1,000. So then why did I say these discoveries changed everything? Well, this one carries with it all the memories of visiting the old abandoned factory, and this is the style I'd like to have. So finding one with all the original tags and paperwork, well, for my own home, I think this is the perfect example to keep as a forever piece. I'll need to make two trim pieces since I don't have a piece of lumber long enough for the entire bottom section, but I'll split this right where the veneer is split in the middle of the cedar chest. I'm hoping this will make it look a little more intentional. I've been asked before to share more details regarding the HVLP sprayer, so I'll do my best. It's already cold here in Wisconsin, and I do my best to keep the temperature in the garage around 60 degrees Fahrenheit. I'll first clean out the sprayer with lacquer thinner. This is a cheap HVLP sprayer with a standard 1.8mm tip. I keep the pressure regulated between 25 to 35 psi. All of the valves are wide open, and the only thing I adjust is the fan width to about 30 degrees. I'm using a 26-gallon air compressor, a $400 special from Harbor Freight. The first thing I'll do is spray on a few coats of this lacquer sealer and add a little lacquer thinner. It should help protect against exposure to moisture and will provide a nice base coat for the final protective top coat. Spraying inside the shop like this is not ideal for many reasons, but most importantly, I'll wear this mask to protect against inhaling these fine particles in the air. This lacquer sealer dries quickly, and once I have one coat applied, I can do color touch-ups with these powder stains mixed in lacquer sealer. I found a close match to the color of this damaged section on the top of the chest. This is a pretty simple repair, but for whatever reason, in the moment, I decided I kind of liked this little imperfection. So for now, I'll leave it exposed. Between coats of sealer, I'll sand out any trapped dust particles, then clean the surface with wax wash remover. I chose a flat, clear lacquer for the final top coat. It will still reflect light. I just don't want this piece to have a glossy sheen. If you're following along with this busy week, this is episode number 151, and you should still see a few more restoration projects in the coming days. I said it recently, I feel blessed, but I don't really have any attachment to most material things in this world. However, in this season, this finished piece carries significance and resonates with me. This year has held its share of highs and lows. I drove from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast, and more than once, I felt the heartbreak of saying goodbye to loved ones, but I also experienced the joy of welcoming new, lifelong friends, and the unexpected blessing of two incredible dogs who have already changed my life. As I reflect on this year and begin a new chapter to this story, all I can say is, whatever you do, for a living, as a hobby, or both, do it with passion and to the best of your ability. Part of what makes us human is the ability to dream, or in this case, hope. And that likely looks very different for all of us, so just be good to one another. Maybe this holiday season feels a little quieter for some reason. Maybe there's someone you wish could be here, someone you miss for reasons you can't control. I think many of us are carrying that same feeling. But even in that space, there's room for something meaningful. Maybe take a moment to honor them in a simple way. A memory, a tradition, a small gesture that reminds you of who they were and what they meant. A reminder that love doesn't disappear. It just changes form and stays with us in the moments we choose to remember. My name is Barry, and thanks for joining me. Goodbye for now.